Ladies and gentlemen, when we talk about armies in Japanese anime, we often imagine noble squads, loyal comrades, and warriors bound by honor. But Vinland Saga dares to show us something far more uncomfortable. It introduces us to Askeladd's army, not as heroes, not as patriots, but as survivors of a cruel world. This band of mercenaries is not just a group of fighters. It is the environment that shapes Thorfinn's hatred, the forge where his innocence is burned away, and the shadow that follows him into adulthood. Askeladd's army exists like a moving storm across the world of Vinland Saga, never settling, never belonging, and never offering peace. It is not simply a group of warriors marching together, it is a living battlefield where violence, fear, greed, and survival constantly collide. Every campsite feels temporary, every victory feels hollow, and every man knows that tomorrow he could be dead. This environment is essential to understanding why Askeladd's army feels so different from traditional anime war bands and why it leaves such a deep scar on Thorfinn's soul. In many Japanese anime, an army or squad represents unity, brotherhood, or shared ideals. Even when the world is cruel, there is often some form of moral center, a code, a dream, or a promise of something better. Askeladd's army strips all of that away. These men do not fight for a homeland, a king they respect, or a cause they believe in. They fight because war feeds them. Violence keeps them alive. Loot gives them purpose. This creates an atmosphere where life has no value beyond its usefulness in battle, turning the army itself into a constant state of conflict rather than a force moving through one. Every day inside Askeladd's army is a test of dominance. Strength decides status, fear maintains order, and weakness invites death. There is no safety, even among allies. Men laugh together at night and slaughter villages together by morning, not because they enjoy cruelty, but because cruelty is normalized. This is the true horror of Askeladd's band. It does not rely on monsters or supernatural evil. It shows how ordinary men can become brutal when survival becomes the only law. In anime storytelling, this realism hits harder than exaggerated villainy because it feels possible. Askeladd understands this battlefield better than anyone. He does not try to erase the chaos within his army, he controls it. He lets his men believe they are free, while carefully steering their violence toward outcomes that benefit him. The army becomes an extension of his mind, unpredictable on the surface, but guided underneath by calculation. This makes the band feel alive, like a creature with many heads and no conscience, moving wherever Askeladd points it. It is not disciplined like a royal force, but it is effective because it thrives in disorder. For Thorfinn, growing up inside this living battlefield is catastrophic. He is not trained in a school, raised by a village, or protected by a mentor who values his humanity. Instead, he is raised by war itself. Every scream, every raid, every corpse becomes part of his daily reality. The army does not teach him right or wrong, it teaches him how to survive long enough to keep hating. His childhood is consumed by the noise of clashing steel and dying men, and this constant exposure reshapes his understanding of the world. What makes Askeladd's army especially destructive is its lack of emotional space. There is no time to grieve, no room to process trauma. When someone dies, the band moves on. When a village burns, they eat and sleep. This emotional numbness is contagious. Thorfinn learns that pain is something to ignore, not confront. In anime terms, this creates a protagonist whose emotional growth is frozen, trapped at the moment of his father's death. The battlefield never allows him to heal, it only sharpens his anger. The army's structure also reinforces this cycle. Respect is earned through killing, not compassion. Power comes from fear, not trust. This teaches Thorfinn that violence is not just a tool, but an identity. He is praised when he fights well, tolerated when he obeys, and discarded when he shows weakness. In such an environment, hatred becomes fuel. Revenge becomes purpose. The battlefield shapes him into a weapon because that is the only role it offers. Askeladd's army is constantly on the move, which mirrors Thorfinn's internal restlessness. There is no home, no destination, only the next battle. This endless motion prevents reflection. The world becomes a blur of blood and snow, and Thorfinn's life reduces to a single goal. In Japanese anime, stillness often allows characters to grow. Askeladd's army denies stillness entirely, trapping Thorfinn in an emotional loop that lasts for years. Ultimately, Askeladd's army is not just a background element of Vinland Saga, it is a character in itself. It breathes violence, feeds on chaos, and shapes everyone who enters it. For Thorfinn, it becomes the furnace that forges his hatred, burning away innocence and leaving behind only rage and endurance. This living battlefield does not just surround him, it defines him, proving that sometimes the most dangerous enemy in anime is not a single villain, but the world that raises one. Askeladd's army is made up of men who are already broken long before they ever pick up a sword under his command. These are not heroic warriors chosen for loyalty or honor, they are survivors, criminals, deserters, and killers shaped by famine, war, and desperation. In Vinland Saga, this composition is deliberate, and it explains why the band functions the way it does. Each man carries his own trauma, greed, and fear, and when these individual darknesses come together, they form an army with no moral center, only momentum. Unlike traditional anime groups where members slowly become a found family, Askeladd's army never truly becomes one. There is no emotional bond holding them together. What unites them is profit and survival. They follow Askeladd because he wins battles, keeps them alive, and leads them toward loot. Loyalty is transactional. The moment Askeladd stops being useful, they would turn on him without hesitation. This fragile unity creates constant tension, making every interaction feel dangerous. In Japanese anime terms, this kind of group dynamic removes comfort entirely and replaces it with uncertainty. Askeladd understands the psychology of his men perfectly. He knows they are driven by fear of death and hunger for reward, not ideals. Instead of trying to inspire them with speeches or promises of glory, he manipulates their instincts. He gives them victories just often enough to maintain trust, and he uses punishment sparingly but decisively to keep order. This balance of reward and terror keeps the army functional. It is not love that holds them together, it is controlled chaos. Within this environment, cruelty becomes entertainment. Jokes are made over corpses. Villages are burned without hesitation. This is not because the men are uniquely evil, but because repeated violence has stripped them of empathy. In anime storytelling, repeated exposure to brutality often creates either hardened warriors or shattered victims. Askeladd's men become both. They laugh loudly, fight fiercely, and die suddenly. Their lives are loud and short, and they accept that reality without question. For Thorfinn, being surrounded by these men is psychologically devastating. He grows up observing adults who see killing as routine and compassion as weakness. This teaches him that mercy has no place in survival. Even when he is young, no one stops him from fighting, instead, they encourage it when it benefits them. The army does not protect his childhood, it consumes it. In this sense, Askeladd's army becomes a twisted classroom where hatred is the core subject. What makes this especially tragic is that Thorfinn is never truly one of them. He is tolerated because he is useful, not because he belongs. He eats with them, travels with them, and fights beside them, but he remains isolated. This isolation deepens his obsession with revenge, because revenge is the only thing that gives him identity within the group. Without it, he would be nothing more than another disposable child soldier. Askeladd's army also represents a larger theme in Vinland Saga, how systems of violence perpetuate themselves. These men were shaped by war, and now they shape the next generation through war. Thorfinn becomes living proof of this cycle. Hatred is passed down, sharpened, and normalized. In anime terms, the army is not just a group of antagonists, it is a mechanism of generational trauma. Ultimately, the band that follows Askeladd is terrifying not because of individual strength, but because it reflects how easily humanity can be lost when survival becomes the only goal. These men are not monsters born from darkness, they are ordinary people who adapted to a brutal world. And by growing up among them, Thorfinn learns the hardest and most painful lesson of all, that hatred thrives best when it is constantly surrounded by violence. Askeladd's army operates as a living weapon rather than a brotherhood, and how that structure turns violence into routine instead of tragedy. In many Japanese anime, warrior groups are built on shared dreams, loyalty, or destiny. Even darker anime often give their groups a code, a belief, or a shared emotional bond. Askeladd's army deliberately rejects all of that. It is a machine designed for war, and every man inside it is a replaceable part. The army's structure is simple but ruthless. Strength is respected, weakness is mocked, and failure is punished. There is no sense of long-term future for most of the men. They live from battle to battle, raid to raid, fully aware that death could come at any moment. This awareness removes fear but also removes hope. When a person stops believing in tomorrow, today becomes meaningless, and cruelty becomes easy. This is why the army can massacre villages without hesitation. There is no moral pause, no internal debate, only action. Askeladd reinforces this system by never pretending to be noble. He does not glorify killing, but he does not condemn it either. He treats violence like a tool, and his men learn to do the same. When someone dies, there is no mourning. The body is left behind, and the march continues. In anime storytelling, death is often emotional and dramatic. In Vinland Saga, death inside Askeladd's army is quiet and forgettable, which makes it even more horrifying. It shows how completely desensitized these warriors have become. This environment transforms human life into currency. A man's worth is measured by how useful he is in battle. If he can fight, he eats. If he can kill, he lives another day. If he hesitates, he dies. There is no room for compassion, because compassion slows the machine down. Over time, the men stop seeing enemies as people and start seeing them as obstacles. Villagers are not families, they are resources. Children are not innocent, they are future threats or tools. This worldview is absorbed unconsciously, especially by Thorfinn. For Thorfinn, growing up in this machine shapes his understanding of strength. He believes that being strong means being ruthless, fast, and emotionally empty. He watches grown men laugh after killing, and he learns that emotions are weaknesses to be buried. This lesson follows him long after Askeladd's army is gone. In anime terms, this is the origin of his internal conflict. His later guilt and emptiness are not sudden changes, they are the delayed consequences of living inside a system that erased empathy. The army also shows how leadership can normalize evil without ever directly commanding it. Askeladd rarely orders unnecessary cruelty, but he never stops it either. His silence becomes approval. This is a powerful theme often explored in mature Japanese anime. Evil does not always come from commands, it comes from systems that allow harm to continue unchallenged. The men do what they believe is expected of them, and over time, that expectation becomes their identity. What makes this even more tragic is that many of these men likely had normal lives once. They may have had families, dreams, and values. War stripped those away and replaced them with survival instincts. Askeladd's army is not a collection of villains, it is a graveyard of broken humanity still walking. This perspective forces the viewer to confront an uncomfortable truth. In the right conditions, anyone can become part of such a machine. By portraying the army this way, Vinland Saga turns violence into a warning rather than entertainment. The brutality is not glorified, it is repetitive, empty, and exhausting. Askeladd's army exists to show the cost of a world ruled by the sword. It explains why Thorfinn's hatred feels endless and why his eventual search for peace is so difficult. When a child grows up inside a weapon, learning how to live as a human again becomes the hardest battle of all. Askeladd's army ultimately becomes a curse that traps everyone involved, especially Thorfinn, and how its legacy continues long after the blades are lowered. In many Japanese anime, once an enemy group is defeated or disbanded, its influence fades. Vinland Saga takes a much more realistic and painful approach. Askeladd's army may disappear physically, but mentally and emotionally, it survives inside the characters it shaped. For Thorfinn, the army is not just a memory, it is a wound that never healed. Every lesson he learned there was built on hatred, survival, and violence. He was taught that life only had meaning if it was used for revenge. Even after Askeladd's death, Thorfinn does not feel free. Instead, he feels hollow. This is because the army did not just train his body, it programmed his mind. Without enemies, without orders, and without hatred to fuel him, he does not know who he is. This is a powerful anime theme. When a character loses their purpose, they must face themselves, and that can be more terrifying than any battlefield. The army's curse also affects the men who survived it. Those who lived long enough are left with nothing but scars and habits shaped by war. They are incapable of peaceful life because peace feels meaningless to them. Violence gave them structure, identity, and belonging, even if it was cruel. This reflects a harsh truth often explored in mature anime. War creates people who cannot live without it. Askeladd's army is not just a group of killers, it is a system that destroys the possibility of normal humanity. Askeladd himself is not free from this curse. Even though he controls the army, he is still trapped by it. He cannot walk away because the army is both his shield and his prison. It allows him to survive in a brutal world, but it also forces him to continue committing acts he despises. This contradiction is what makes him one of the most complex characters in Japanese anime storytelling. He manipulates his men, yet he also protects a future he believes in. The army is the sin he carries so that others might live. This creates a chilling realization. Askeladd's army exists not because its men love violence, but because the world rewards it. Kings use warriors, nations rise on blood, and mercenaries become tools of ambition. The army is a symptom of a broken world, not the cause. Vinland Saga uses this group to criticize the glorification of war often seen in history and fiction. It reminds the audience that every legendary battle is built on suffering that does not disappear when the story moves on. The legacy of Askeladd's army is most clearly seen in Thorfinn's transformation later in the story. His desire to create a land without war is a direct response to the life he was forced to live. He does not reject violence because it is weak, he rejects it because he understands its cost better than anyone. This contrast between his childhood and his future makes his character arc deeply emotional and profoundly human. In the end, Askeladd's army serves as a warning carved into the soul of Vinland Saga. It shows how easily humans can be shaped into weapons and how difficult it is to become human again. The band that once fueled Thorfinn's hatred becomes the very reason he seeks peace. And through that painful journey, the anime delivers one of its strongest messages: true strength is not found in the ability to destroy others, but in the courage to break free from the cycle of violence itself.